just give me a second. Okay, so we're now recording this, so this will be there for future use, hopefully. And let's see how this goes. Stop me at any time. This is different than when we worked in Collaborate. I don't think there's a way to raise your hand or anything like that, but you can type, put a question mark. You can, if there's only 3 of us online, so you're certainly welcome to speak if you prefer that, okay? As I started to say before, this portion, actually, once you made it through part 1 of the assignment, that was the hardest part of the entire assignment, in my opinion, but you all did well. And now part 2, I think you're going to find a lot easier, and part 3 is not too terrible. So let's take a look. Okay, so part B is due on the 12th. Of April. So you should have started looking at this, hopefully. The files for the 2 assignments, for the 2 readings are in Blackboard. You notice that the first one is called Text Genre and Science Content, Ease of Reading, Comprehension, and Reader Preferences, and it's from a psychology publication. And the other one is Rethinking Reading Comprehension, a comparison of instructions for strategies and content approaches. So I made it easy by putting the PDF files of those 2 in the assignment area for you. Again, we're using a template. And the template is on page 71 of your text, but this is what you are addressing in that, that's in that template. And this is why I think it's easier, because what you're being asked to look at, I think, is going to pop right out at you. Who is the target population in each study? Who are the participants in the study? Where are these participants located? When was the data collected or gathered? How did they choose the sample? And why did they choose the sample? Now, if those items are not jumping off out of that selection that you're reading, the research study, then you'll also make note of that. But good research studies include these things for us. So what you're also going to address in your narrative is, do you feel like the authors gave you sufficient information about the procedures? And what that means is, can you, after reading it, say, I know exactly how they went about doing this study. I can visualize what they did to get to where they are. Then you're going to look at the procedures they used. Do you think these were relevant procedures? Would you do it the same way? Do you think the way they handled this was a good idea? Did they identify their instruments? And by instruments, we mean assessments that they used, anything that they used in the study. Is it clearly identified? If they gave the students a test, do we know what test? And do we have details about it? And were these instruments appropriate and sufficient for their study? And again, you're going to have to make some judgment calls here as to whether you think that's the case or not. So again, on page 95 in our textbook is a very good template for you to take a look at. And I'm just turning to my text right now. So let me go back a second and see if I left something out that I shouldn't have. Okay, so first, if you have your textbook handy and you can look at it, that's fine. If not, just let me go back to this one. So your template on page 71 says, target population, what is it? Can you identify the ultimate target? Then we say participants in the study. You're looking for who participated. Did they give you sufficient details? did the participants appear to reflect the target population? So first, the author is going to identify who they wanted their target to be. Now, did they really get participants that match that target? Okay. Where were the participants? In what setting was this data gathered? So were they kids in school? Were they in a daycare center? Were they at home? Where were they when this study was done? Do we know? And does it seem to be an appropriate setting for this particular study? When was it gathered, the data? Can you easily identify the time period? And might that time period or the time at which they took to collect that data influence the findings? So, for instance, if it was a very short-term study that took place over the course of 2 weeks, let's say, well, that's going to obviously make a difference as opposed to a study that took place over the course of a school year. Do the authors tell us how the sample was selected? And did they tell us the procedures for doing that? And then the last one, why? And then this is important. Do we, as the readers of this study, suspect that the sample selected was chosen randomly? Or was there maybe a purpose that the author had, the researcher had? Might there have been a bias by the researchers in the use of this sample? Sometimes researchers have bias, meaning that they really want the study to come out a certain way to prove their point. So we're going to look as we read these and see, do we think this is without any prejudice or bias, or do we think that our researcher had an ulterior motive here? Was there something they were trying to manipulate by choosing their sample? So, for instance, if I wanted to do a study that students who are on reduced lunch don't do as well in reading comprehension, well, am I kind of setting myself up for this to come out a certain way? Or is that a valid way to look at this? So we want to make sure that we don't have bias in the selection process. All right, so now this part, page 95, says, did the researchers provide sufficient information? And the reason we want this is we want to know, could we replicate or could somebody replicate this study with a different participant sample? Now, if you one day decide that you're going on for your doctorate and you have to do research and a thesis, well, sometimes you decide to replicate a study that was done, but with a different population to see if the theory holds true. Are the procedures relevant for research questions? I mean, are we, sometimes researchers research things that are of no importance. The whole point of doing this is so that hopefully it's something that will help us in the classroom, will help us in our teaching, will ultimately benefit the student. And then the last part, the identified instruments appear appropriate and sufficient to define and describe the variables investigated in the study. And we're going to talk a little bit more about variables, although you gave some examples in your discussion posts. Okay, so is that, you're feeling okay with that so far?
Yes.
Great, good. Okay, so basically when we read this research, there are, in qualitative research, there are 5 elements that we usually look for. That it's conducted in a natural setting, that there's a lot of descriptive data, that the emphasis is on process more than product, that there's some inductive logic, and that we see that there's a search for meaning taking place. So that's qualitative, not quantitative, but qualitative, more feely. I get the idea from this kind of thing. So, not quite as definitive as quantitative, which deals in numbers and is pretty much more black and white. There can be a gray area.
What is
Quantitative,
I'm
yes,
sorry.
go ahead.
The inductive logic? What is that again?
Okay, inductive logic is a manner of reasoning. You can either be deductive or inductive in your thought process. So let me give you a definition of each one of those that will help you, I hope. So deductive logic or deductive reasoning, same thing. Let's see if I can get a nice, okay. Deductive reasoning is thought of as a skill kind of that develops. Deductive reasoning goes from the general to the specific. So that's really important to remember. So deductive is general to the specific, whereas inductive is the exact opposite. Okay? So inductive then does what?
So it goes from specific. Is it a specific skill?
Right, you start out specifically and then you make broad generalizations, okay? So again, inductive is the opposite of deductive. Inductive makes broad generalizations from specific observations, okay? So you might take a specific study. I might have done one study on third graders in Miami-Dade County, and all of a sudden I'm going to publish that and say, third graders all over the United States are going to benefit from this based on what I'm doing, okay? Whereas, so inductive is specific, and then you make a broader generalization, whereas deductive is exactly the opposite, okay? Does that make that clear a little bit, I hope? And it should be in our text as well. Let's see.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, do I see it in the text?
I don't see it in here, but it probably is.
Okay. It's not jumping out at me in the text, but it should be there. Not sure why it's not there. Okay, but I think we've got that. Okay, so, and the other way that you can think about deductive is deductive is you take one or more statements and then you draw your conclusion. So some people think of it this way. Deductive is top-down logic, and inductive is bottom-up logic. So in deductive reasoning, a conclusion is reached by applying general rules, okay? And induction is actually just the opposite. So here's an example of a deductive argument. All men are mortal. Socrates is a man. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. Okay? So I'm taking a generalization and then I'm making it more specific. So that's deductive. Let's see if I can give you an example of inductive. Okay, let's see. All right, here's an example of induction of reasoning. Jennifer leaves for school at 7 a.m. Jennifer is always on time. Jennifer assumes then that she will always be on time if she always leaves at 7 a.m. Okay? Um, that's an example. Another example. Um, the cost of goods was $1. The cost of labor to manufacture them was 50 cents. The sales price was $5. So this item must always provide a good profit.
Mm-hmm.
All right, does that make sense, I hope?
Yeah,
Okay.
somewhat, yeah.
All right, good. Okay, we don't have to make ourselves too crazy, but that should give you an idea. Okay. All right, so now the next thing that we deal with in research is looking at variables. So an independent variable is something you have control over as a researcher, things that you can manipulate. And that's important because it is usually what you think will affect the dependent variable. In some cases, you might not be able to manipulate the independent variable. It may be something that's already there and fixed, something that you would like to evaluate with respect to how it affects something else. So the dependent variable is like color, kind, time. But look at this example. You're interested in how stress affects heart rate in humans. Your independent variable would be the stress, and the dependent variable would be the heart rate. Because we can manipulate stress levels, right?
Mm-hmm.
The only way that the heart rate's going to be manipulated is because I've already manipulated the stress levels.
Right.
You can't sit here and say, all right, I'm going to make my heart beat faster right now just by thinking about it. But if I were to put you on a treadmill and make you run, your heart rate's going to increase. Or if I start talking to you about, gee, I'm sorry, I forgot to tell you, if you don't pass the final, you're not passing this course. So all of a sudden, I'm creating a higher level of stress, and perhaps your heart rate would start going faster as well. So some things we can manipulate, we have control over it, but some things we don't. So if I need a quiet setting for testing, I'm going to make sure that I'm not doing my testing next to outside the cafeteria or next to the music room. Okay. So I can control those variables if I can control my setting. But there are other things that I can't control. I can't control if the student is motivated or not motivated that day to take the test,
Oh,
Mm-hmm.
right? If we could
yeah. Right.
only have control over our students' motivation, that would be great, but we don't. We can't control what the parents do at home with those students.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So some things we can and some things we can't. Some things will make a difference in our study. Some things are going to be fixed. So dependent variable are those things we measure in the experiment and what's going to be affected during that experiment. So the dependent variable responds to the independent. That's why it's called dependent. It depends on the independent. So in a scientific experiment, you can't have a dependent variable without an independent variable. So here's another example using the same stress. You're interested in how stress affects heart rate in humans. Your independent variable would be the stress. The dependent variable would be the heart rate. Again, why? Because we can manipulate stress directly in our subjects, and then we can measure how that stress changes the heart rate. Actually, that's if your doctor sends you for a stress test, that's exactly what they're doing. They're manipulating your heart rate by getting you on a treadmill and asking you to run. So in experiments or research, we do the same things. We look for, well, what's going to make, and maybe then what you might do is to block out noise. Maybe you have students who are easily distracted. So you're going to decide, you're going to do an experiment to see if I can block out the noise for my students, can I get them to focus more on the task at hand? So what might you do? You might say, all right, everybody's going to wear headsets today. That's going to block out all extraneous noise. Or, um, or maybe you want to do a study and see, does classical music, and people have done studies on this, does that help aid in doing reading? Actually, it doesn't help in reading, but they did find that playing classical music helps some students in math to concentrate better. So there are studies that have looked at things like that and used the music as a variable. Okay. Then, and some of you gave good examples of this, we have extraneous variables, things that could cause changes in our study. Okay. We might realize that age plays a role in outcome, or family history, or the education of the parents, or the interest. Don't you sometimes think that if the students were taking a reading test that they actually found the passage interesting, they might score a lot higher on that test than some of the passages that we're asking them to read?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So if there's an element of interest there, then you have a whole different thing. So these things might be extraneous, but extraneous variables, the list can become very long. But if we want our study to be valid and reliable, we have to try to identify them. So, even in one of our classrooms, we might realize that our students come from very different backgrounds, they have very different experiences, and all these things are extraneous variables that we really can't control, but it might have an effect on our study. And it doesn't mean you don't do the study, it just means that you identify them and say, this might have made a difference to some degree. Okay. So in all studies, reliability is really important. And I know you've heard about reliability before, because it's really the consistency, whether it be a test or a survey or an observation or anything we measure. So I thought this was a pretty good example. Imagine you step on your bathroom scale and you weigh 140 pounds, only to find out that for some reason, an hour later, you get on the scale again and it says 180 pounds. Then we'd all be crying. And then an hour later, though, again, it says 100 pounds. So knowing how inconsistent this scale is, we couldn't use this in our research study, obviously, because every time we'd get a different result. So consider an important study on a new diet program that relies on your inconsistent or unreliable bathroom scale as the main way to collect information regarding weight change. Of course, the results would not be accurate. Okay. And we have many other instances of this that we see in our schools, that tests are not always, that we give our students are not always valid and reliable. So, even with this whole new push to do testing on the computer, all the issues with that, and there are so many, because think of it, one child might be much more computer savvy than another child. Somebody might be not a very good visual learner, or for some people, it's not even the same looking at something on the screen as it is on paper. So all these things change things. And the other aspect of this is validity, and that's the degree to which our test measures what we intended to measure. So the test question, 1 plus 1, is obviously a valid basic addition question because it truly measures the student's ability to perform addition. It becomes less valid as a measurement of advanced addition because as it addresses some required knowledge, it doesn't represent all knowledge for an advanced understanding of addition. So just from having simple things like 1 plus 1 and 2 plus 2, we couldn't say that this student has mastered all aspects of addition, because what would happen if we gave them 4 numbers to add? instead of just two numbers? Could they still do it? What if we gave them fractions or decimals to add? Could they still do it? So again, we need to be careful that we don't jump to these conclusions. Something might seem valid on the surface, but is it intended? If all we want to say is this student has a very basic knowledge of addition, well, then that might be okay. And then the other example, if we're measuring knowledge of American history, then asking 1 plus 1 is completely invalid, right? Adding two digits has absolutely nothing to do with history. And if it's in that format, 1 plus 1 equals, I don't even know, what it tells us other than that the student can add two single-digit numbers.
Mm-hmm.
There's also something called content validity, and that is concerned with a test's ability to include or represent all the content of a particular construct. And here's what we mean by that. So, as we said before, 1 plus 1 is a valid basic addition. Would it represent all the content that makes up the study of mathematics? Absolutely not. Might it be included on a scale of intelligence? It might be, but does it represent all of intelligence? Absolutely not. Okay? So to develop a valid test of intelligence, there has to be not only questions on math, but questions on verbal reasoning, analytical ability, and every other aspect of what we consider to be intelligence. So, really, there's not an easy way to determine content validity except from an expert opinion. And we have to determine who our experts are, obviously. Okay, so for instance, then, in reading now, we know we talk about the big five and the importance of phonics and phonemic awareness and vocabulary and comprehension and fluency. So those all make up what we consider to be part of good reading instruction. Where did we get this from? Well, because some experts said it was so. The National Reading Panel said it was so. This is what we're going to focus on, the big five. So we have to assume that there's some content validity there. So if we were doing a study to see by what age do students master all of these skills in our schools, we'd have to assume that there was content validity there simply because we're going with a higher source. We talked about this a little before, bias, but we can have observer bias. And that is, it could be us. If we're the observer in our study or somebody else is the observer, people's tendency, even though it might be unconscious, is to distort how they see what's happening in situations or events. We often see what we expect to see. I'm sure you've heard examples of where they asked two people to report what happened as witnesses to a car accident. And the two will have very different stories, even though they witnessed the same exact thing. Same thing with students. If you ask two students, okay, tell me what happened. Explain to me what happened here if there was a fight, right? We're going to get different stories. Everybody's going to say, oh, no, miss, he hit her first. Oh, no, he didn't. He hit her. And we'll hear everybody's got their own bias. And even we all, it's very hard not to have some kind of bias. Triangulation has to do with using more than one method to collect data on the same topic. And this helps us to keep things valid. And you can see from the word triangulation, right? It looks like triangle, which is 3, right? So the way that we assure validity of research is to use a variety of methods to collect data on the same topic. So maybe we use different. So if I'm really going to come up with something like, about a broad statement about how we should teach reading, or then I'm going to have to prove that it works on different sample populations, that I've collected my data in different and multiple ways, and that every time I do this, I still come out with the same results. So then I can say, well, it really looks like this must be the way it is, right? If I do a study and it's and that's why it's so important, even like, even in our own personal lives, if you want to read about the latest and greatest diet to follow. Well, who did the study, right? How many people participated in the study? How long did the weight loss last? How many regained the weight? How healthy was it? There's so many different things. If you have a group of 5 people in the study and they don't tell us that, and they just tell us, oh, the sample group, each person in the sample group each lost 15 pounds in 7 days. Sounds great, right? So until we hear that, oh, well, it was 5 people who maybe had a lot of weight to lose, or maybe it was, there's so many variables. Did they go on a fast? Is that how they lost that 15 pounds? Were there drugs involved? Were there, so many different things? And if the authors of these studies don't give us all this information, we shouldn't be so trusting. So then we're going to look for internal consistency. And this is a measure of how well the items on the test measure those ideas. So, and again, you could go back to the same example of the 1+1. If I'm giving a test to measure, and I'm doing research to measure the student's grasp of geometry, well, where does 1+1 come into this? Why am I even using that as part of my measure? So I want to make sure that whatever it is that I'm testing has to make sense with the outcome and has some meaning. So I'm looking for consistency. This is a great resource, and let me see if I can open it and have you see it. Wait, let me get there. This will be interesting. That's not good. Okay, wait. If I can, okay. Oh, it did open. It opened right behind it. So can you see that now?
Yes.
I don't know why. I don't know why you see all these things on the side of my screen, because let's see. Can I get rid of them? I apologize. Okay, there it is. Okay, so this I think is really good.
Oh, you put on speaker.
Can you see that? How to understand a policymaker's primer in education research? That's what I have up on my screen. That's what you should see.
Yes.
Okay, so I like this a lot, and I gave you this link in Blackboard
Yes.
and in this PowerPoint, because um, anything that you're having trouble with as you're doing this is here. What is the research question? What's happening? What questions should be asked? And does the design match the research question? How was the study conducted? And here's some more examples on the participants, how weight is selected. And it tells you, even in greater detail, what should it include? Not only the characteristics, but does it mention a school or a district? Does it tell us how they were chosen? Does it define what exactly was done? So this has so much information. This is a nice thing for you to save, on your computer, and keep it so that you can go back to it should you need it going forward as well, because it really talks about qualitative and quantitative and validity, and all the things that we mentioned a little bit are really defined here. Okay. So this just has about everything under the sun in a nice, compact, easy to understand way. So I wanted you to have that. Let's see. Now that I close that, was that the end? Yeah, that was my last slide there. So let me see if I can go back to our course. And I think I'm there. Okay, so except I have the wheel of death on my little computer, that little beach ball going around. I don't know if you see that or not, but that's never a good sign for me when I'm working on my computer. Um, so hopefully you've taken a look at the assignment itself, which is where I wanted to go, but let's see if I can get there anyway. Not really. Okay, so do you have questions that I can answer? Is my main question for you. And how do you feel about doing this portion of this? So for this one, you're using these two articles. For the third part, we go back to the first two articles. I'm not quite sure why they did it that way, why they didn't use the same two articles consistently, but they did not. Let me just go over. Yeah, go ahead. Question? No?
I feel like having a good understanding of, what we're supposed to do. My only question is, as far as when we're writing the paper, are we writing this paper as a separate entity, or are we supposed to take what we
You're right.
and
You're writing this as if you are an evaluator of research, okay? And that's exactly what you're doing. So you're writing this one in very much the same way that you wrote the first one, only you're
okay,
addressing the things that we talked about here. And you're doing it for two different research papers.
okay,
And you could take the first one first. I mean, make it simple on yourself. Take the first one first,
right,
um, and then do the second one. And for each one, just make sure that you've addressed the
all
item
of the
in
questions.
the template. And I put the shortened version of that template in the PowerPoint, but on the 2 pages in the text are the longer version. And that's really all that you need to do. And as I said, these particular items I think are easier to discuss than the first ones were.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, good.
Yes.
Yeah, so I don't think that's going to be too much of an issue. So
Okay,
um, you have until the 12th to do that. If you need a little more time, you can take it. Just let me know, because we don't have anything due then until the last part of the assignment is going to be due week 8. And also in week 8, we have a final writing. But since I don't think it's fair to have everybody online at the same time, because I know that's even with 3 people, it's difficult to get 3 people online at the same time. Because that's why you take an online course, so that you don't have to be online at the same time. So I'm going to make the final writing available to you that whole last week, okay, from the 27th to probably the 2nd or so, so that you have a couple of days to address it. And trust me, that's not going to be hard. Um, and you can use resources, you can use whatever you want to do that final writing. The third part of our assignment, I didn't want to talk about too much because I don't want to really confuse the issue while you're still working on assignment B. So I'm not even sure if we should have another chat, if we need it. Do you find it helpful that I put up the videos for you each week?
yes,
Okay. So thank you. I'm glad, because I'd hate to think I was wasting my time. So I just think at least you hear something from me and you get some contact and know that you're going in the right direction and have some ideas. So let's see how you do on 2, and then we'll decide if we need to have another chat. And if you want, certainly I'm always available to talk with you. There's just going to be a couple of days where I'm not available, but I'll be online anyway, answering questions, that's for sure, via my email. But I'm going to be out of town and not have access to my computer, and I don't think I can do this from my tablet or my phone. So if after you turn in this assignment, part B, if we think we need to talk about part C, or you just need me to make the PowerPoint and share it with you, I'll do it. I'll do whatever you guys find best. And
okay,
let me remind you also, email me, call me if you need. whatever it is, so that I can help you. And, if you turn this in and, like Elaine was sure that she screwed it up. And she was so wrong because she did such a good job on it. So, but I understand, because believe me, when I looked at these the first time I taught this course, I was like, let me read this again. What do they have to do? So I know what you mean when it's somewhat confusing. But really, what the premise of this course is that you read research and you learn to be a good evaluator of research, and that you know what to look for, so that I need to look at the sample. I need to look at the target population. I need to see if the study was valid. I need to see if this looks like they used reliable methods and procedures. I need to see, did it look like there was a bias here? Did the author really, have a certain way he or she wanted the study to turn out? So that we're just looking to see, because remember, we don't want to choose something and make decisions, based on something. We do this all the time in education. Somebody, in some ivory tower, conducts research. Somebody else reads it, and then they go and spend millions of dollars to purchase a program that the teachers are scratching their heads and saying, "Who chose this?"
Yeah.
Amen.
Yes, for sure.
Right?
Right.
That's why we're in the mess we're in today.
Exactly. I couldn't agree more. So that's why, not that the three of you in this class can change the world. Unfortunately, you can't. But at least when you're reading these things, you can do so more effectively and say, wait a minute. Or if you're involved on a committee at your school or in your district, you can ask the right question.
Mhm.
Is it valid? Is it reliable? Who was this tested on? Who used this material that they said this works so well? Because if it was some group in Iowa, it's not exactly Miami-Dade or Broward County, same population, So what works there may not work here, probably
Right.
won't. So, anyway, I'll get off my soapbox. And if you have questions, I'm happy to answer them. Um, and if not, get busy working. Start it. If you send me something and it's not good, I'll send it back to you to fix. There's only 3 of you in class, so we can do that. Not to worry. Okay?
Okay.
So you're gonna all do fine.
Hey.
It's supposed to be a learning experience. All right. So at any rate, I'll stay on. If you have questions, I'll answer them. If you're done, you can sign off. I'm glad this new method of GoToMeeting worked, because I'm saying Miami-Dade, which was my other employer, excuse me. Nova is going to be using GoToMeeting starting in the summer exclusively. There will be no more Blackboard Collaborate. That's why I thought I would try it out and see how it worked for us. And I think it's better than Blackboard. So we'll see.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, great. All right, well,
Okay.
have a good night. Good luck. And
Okay.